Right.
Okay, so we think that maybe they stood because there's the steering wheel but no seat. So that's what we think. But in this, for the steam engine, they used to put the fire in there to create the steam. So that would have to be going all the time. Okay, now we're going to go around to the blacksmith shop. Oh, okay, before we go to the blacksmith shop, this is a primitive cotton gin. I'm not sure how it worked, but the theory is they would put these cotton plants in it, and instead of having to pick all the burrs and the stems and stuff off by hand, they would put it in this thing, and it would separate just pure cotton from the rest of the plant. So that's what this thing is.
Okay.
Now this is the blacksmith shop. And let's go over here to the corner. This big fan over here to the left, they would take it by hand and they would open it up and close it real slowly, and that would create oxygen that would go into this fireplace. And the fireplace would get very hot, and the blacksmith used to put the steel on there and get it very, very hot, and then he would take the hammer and he would bend it into whatever he was creating. Maybe he was making horseshoes, maybe he was making axes or hoes or something for the farmer to use. But whatever he happened to be making, he had to get that steel very, very hot. He also made, like right here, he's making the metal that would go around a wagon wheel. So the blacksmith had to make that as well. Then they invented something a little later. So instead of having to use that big fan by hand where they would open it, this was something that they invented where they would turn a crank on this and it would create air coming out this, and it would be aimed right at the fire, and it could go for much longer. So that helped the blacksmith.
What is this?
This is an old jigsaw. So it would be run this, they would put their feet on it to make it go because there was no motor. And this was used for very intricate woodworking. So the saw is so tiny that if they needed to make something that looked decorative, that's what they would use. And this is called Cooper's trade. And these are just some of the tools and implements that would be used for woodworking. This is something your dad would have a pretty good grasp of. These are planes, which people still use today. And they've got blades on the bottom. And when you have a plank, they would go back and forth with it, and it would shave off all the rough edges so that it was very smooth. These are homemade mallets for the people that couldn't afford to have hammers. So it would be wood, and somehow they were able to glue a wooden handle into it. Now here, I think there were other ones over here. Here's some more wooden hammers that they had. Here's another one, all made out of wood.
Tell me this one.
That's a wooden spoon, and we still use wooden spoons today, but they were kind of forced into it back then because they couldn't afford the metal. So that would have been a wooden spoon. These are pegs that they would use. They have to cut pegs to an exact hole because they didn't all have nails back then. So they had to use pegs. What is this? I think this, I don't know, Jack. You could ask your dad. That's something to do with a plank. Because see that little that thin piece of wood? That must have tried to make the wood smooth, is all I can guess. I do not know. I don't know what that is. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is a pipe. It's a wooden pipe that they would use, and they must have run that for water. I wouldn't have known they had wooden pipes back then. This is a section of the wooden water main at 4th Avenue North and Church Street, and it was from the 1820s. This is the infamous boring machine. And as you can see, there's a handle here, and there's a screw. And technically, you would take that handle and bore the screw down into the ground to make a hole. Or if families had a lot of children and the children were all giddy and unruly and wouldn't go to bed, they would make those children stand in front of the boring machine until they were so bloody bored that they fell asleep. That's what it was really for. Okay. Okay. This is something that they would use on a well. Here's the handle, and here's all the rope. So this would go above a well, and they would put a bucket on the bottom of the rope, and they could unroll the bucket down into the well to get water, and then they could roll it back up. This is something that they would use to sharpen knives and hoes and anything that was metal that a farmer would have. They would take that crank and start spinning it, and then they would put the metal at an angle against this rock as it would spin, and it would create sparks, but it would sharpen their implements.
Ball hog oiler.
This is a ball hog oiler, and they used to put oil in this ball, and then see those holes? As the pig would rub up against this, it would lubricate his skin, because hogs have very dry skin, and it felt good to them, so they would start rubbing their body all over it, and they would eventually get oil all over their body, and then they would be more comfortable in the sun.
Wait,
This? Okay. This, let's see, what is this thing? There used to be a sign of, oh, this is a grist mill. So this is something that they would put the hay into, and I believe this would automatically grind this part into the flour so that they didn't have to do it with that rock anymore, or they didn't have to do it with that remember that wooden thing that you would turn? Mm-hmm. So this would have been an easier way for them to do that.
Oh,
okay. This was a very large tree, and they would have to take chisels and hammers, and they hollowed this whole thing out. You can still see some of the markings from the hammer, going through it. And they used to fill it with salt. And because they did not have refrigeration back then, when they would get an abundance of meat, which they did often because they had to store for the winter, or they couldn't eat a whole animal at once, they didn't want it to rot, they would then bury it in the salt, and that was able to preserve their meat. This is that same thing like that machine for the horse, only this one is for a sheep. So a sheep would walk on it, and it would be like an animal motor. The sheep would make something run in the front. I don't know what it was attached to, just like the horse one, but it was like their primitive form of a motor. Okay. This is a pea thresher, and it's also called a cracker jack, which Jack and I find very strange. But it was patented in 1890, and since it's a pea thresher, all we can think of in this is that you would put the pea plant or something in there, and it would take the pods off of it for them, so that they wouldn't have to do it manually.
Or for another prediction.
It would do what to Jack?
Peel his head off.
Yeah, it would peel his head off. Okay, that was Jack's idea, not Aunt Mary's. So it would peel Jack's head off. Okay. Now this thing was a pea huller. So after that other machine took the pods off the plant, this then would take the peas out of the huller. Now this is my favorite machine in here. This is a fireless cooker, and while it looks like a toilet, it is not. It's really like our version, or their version, of a crock pot. There are stones inside there, and they would heat those two stones in the fire, and they would be piping hot. They put the stones in there, and then they would put the food on top of the stones, and they would shut this metal container, and they would clasp it shut with these two locks, and then it would be like a slow cooker, because it would stay very hot in there, so that it would cook for them. This is just like the peas, or the vegetables and the beans. They had an abundance of fruit, because the apples would all become mature in probably a 6-week period, and they didn't want any of them to go to waste, and they wanted produce in the winter. So they used to, whatever they couldn't eat, they used to dry them, and they would put the material over the top to keep the insects away while it was being dried. And then in the winter, they could soak these in water, and they could make apple pies or just eat them plain. Nothing went to waste. And these are samples of old iron tubs. The bigger one would have been used for bathing, and the smaller one would be used for washing clothes. And when they bathed, they had to heat water in buckets and pour them into that bathtub to fill it out, and it took a long, long time, so the whole family used to have to bathe in the same water. And this is another sample of a log that they hollowed out.